By 6 o'clock Friday evening, Mabel Crowley had to burn the rye strip. That was what the notice said. Not trim it, not fence it, not explain it. Burn it down to black dirt, clear the county shoulder, and stop interfering with the highway widening project that Bracken County had already promised to the grain haulers before harvest. The notice was printed on white paper, stamped in red, and delivered by a young deputy who could not meet Mabel's eyes. At 76, Mabel had lived long enough to know the difference between law and pressure. Law gave a person time to speak. Pressure came with a deadline. Her son Daniel read the paper twice at the kitchen table and said what everyone else had been thinking. "Mom, it's just rye." But it was not just rye. It had been planted in a crooked line along the Crowley farm before Daniel was born, before the highway had a number, before the county paved over the old wagon road and forgot why the land had been shaped the way it was. Every fall, Mabel let it seed. Every spring, she walked the line with red thread, a pocket knife, and her father's soil book tucked under her arm. The county called that habit superstition. The farmers called it stubbornness. Daniel called it grief. Then the wind shifted. And before Friday came, the sky over Mercy Flats turned the color of rust, the highway patrol lost sight of the road, and the county learned that the old rye strip had never been protecting Mabel's farm. It had been protecting everyone else. If stories about forgotten land, old promises, and the quiet wisdom people mock too soon mean something to you, consider subscribing. Because what happened beside Mabel Crowley's rye strip was not just about a widow, a county order, or a field of weeds. It was about the danger of forgetting why something was planted. The county trucks came at 9 the next morning. 2 white pickups stopped along the gravel shoulder beside Mabel Crowley's east fence. Their tires lifted pale dust that hung over the road, then drifted toward Highway 19 inches, a thin, restless sheet. Behind the fence, the rye strip bent in the warm wind. It did not look worth fighting for. The stalks were gray-green, crooked, and dry at the tips. Some leaned over the wire. Some grew thick where the land dipped into a shallow draw. To a passing driver, it looked like neglect. To Bracken County, it was now an obstruction. Mabel stood at the gate in a faded blue coat, with her father's soil book under one arm. In her pocket was a spool of red thread and a small pocket knife worn smooth at the handle. Commissioner Dale Rusk stepped from the first truck with a clipboard and a public smile. Porter Hale from the county agriculture office followed with a tablet. Deputy Eli Vance stayed near the second truck, holding the folded notice like he wished someone else had delivered it. Daniel Crowley arrived last. He parked hard, climbed out of his hauling pickup, and looked first at the county men, then at his mother. Mabel knew he had been taking every run he could before harvest. She also knew the county road contract was the only thing keeping his business upright. "Mom," Daniel said quietly, "please don't make this worse." "I didn't bring them here," Mabel said. By then, neighbors had begun to gather. Marvin Bell stood by his mailbox. The Keene brothers leaned near a fuel tank. A sedan slowed at the ditch, then stopped. Dale let the audience settle before he spoke. "Mrs. Crowley, we're here to confirm compliance before Friday's burn deadline. This strip has been reviewed by the road office and the agriculture office. It is unmanaged growth within the improvement zone. It creates a fire hazard, a visibility hazard, and a delay to the shoulder widening project." "Looks like weeds to me," Marvin called. A few people laughed. Daniel lowered his eyes. Mabel looked at the rye. Porter tapped his tablet. "Modern erosion data doesn't show protective value here, ma'am. The prevailing wind pattern runs northwest to southeast. This strip won't stop anything meaningful." "Prevailing wind," Mabel said. "Yes, ma'am." She pulled the red thread from her pocket and tied one end to the top fence wire. For a second it hung loose. Then it lifted, trembled, and pulled sideways toward the low draw, not straight across the field. The laughter came again. Dale smiled, as if she had proved his point. "Mrs. Crowley, a piece of thread is not a county study." "No," Mabel said. "It just tells the truth before paper catches up." Daniel stepped closer, his voice low. "Mom, they can charge us if they bring the burn crew in. You know I can't carry that. Not now." Dale's smile thinned. "That is correct. If the county is forced to clear the obstruction, the cost may be assessed to the property. There may also be penalties for delaying a public improvement." The words did what the laughter had not. They made Mabel look at her son. She knew the truck payments. She knew the back taxes had only just been caught up. She knew Daniel had swallowed his pride to take county hauling work from men who still joked about his mother's weed wall. Poverty did not always come as hunger. Sometimes it came stamped in red on white paper. Dale unclipped a release form. "Sign today, and we handle the burn cleanly. No assessment, no penalties," Daniel whispered. "Please." Mabel took the paper. For one quiet moment, it seemed she might sign. Then her eyes moved to the map attached behind the release. The highway shoulder was drawn in black. Her fence line was blue. The rye strip was marked in red, like a mistake. But something was missing. There should have been a thin, broken line curving through the low draw, a line her father had drawn before Highway 19 had its number. Whitcomb Brake Line 1941. Gone. Mabel folded the paper once and handed it back. Dale's face hardened. By 6 o'clock Friday, that rye comes down. Mabel cut the red thread from the fence. The loose end snapped in the wind and brushed her wrist like a warning. Daniel stared at her. "What are you doing?" Mabel tucked the thread into the soil book. "If that rye burns before the wind changes," she said, "this farm won't be the only thing Bracken County loses." No one laughed then, not because they believed her. Because for the first time that morning, even Dale Rusk looked at the road. Mabel Crowley had learned the language of wind before she learned to drive. Her father, Earl Whitcomb, did not believe weather began in the sky. He said it began in the ground first, in the way soil held moisture, in the way a ditch pulled heat, in the way bare fields shivered before dust lifted. Other men in Bracken County checked the clouds. Earl checked fence wire, grass heads, wagon ruts, and the grit on his teeth. When Mabel was a girl, he took her with him in an old county truck that smelled of canvas, pencil shavings, and damp maps. Earl worked for the Soil Conservation Office, though people rarely said the title with respect. To most farmers, he was the man who told them not to plow too close to a draw or scrape a field clean before dry season. "Pretty land can still be sick," he told Mabel once, "and ugly land can be doing the Lord's work." She had not understood that then. She only remembered his hands. They were square and brown, with soil packed into the creases. He carried a red spool in one pocket and a pocket knife in the other. At every fence he tied a short thread to the wire, waited for it to lift, then marked something in his field book. Wind direction, dust pull, low draw behavior, grass hold, road exposure. Mabel used to think those were ordinary words. Later, when other girls saved dance cards and pressed flowers in hymnals, she saved the sound of her father's pencil moving across paper while wind worried at a fence line. The year she turned 17, the dry came early. By May, the fields along Mercy Flats had lost their green shine. By June, every truck passing the old wagon road dragged a brown tail behind it. Men complained at the feed store. Women beat dust from quilts. Children came home from school with red rims around their eyes. Earl grew quieter that summer. He left before dawn and returned after dark with dust in his eyebrows. Mabel's mother set a plate in front of him, but many nights he opened the field book before touching his supper. One evening, he came home with blood on his sleeve. Not much, just a dark smear near the cuff. Earl washed it off at the pump and said a fence nail had caught him, but he did not look at either of them when he said it. 2 days later, county men came to the house. They did not sit. They stood in the front room with their hats in their hands and their voices low. Mabel heard only pieces from the kitchen. Mercer Flats, road bond, no public panic, temporary settlement, unverified cause. Her father's voice rose once. "You know what took that road." Then one county man said, "Careful, Earl. You've got a family." That was the first time Mabel understood that truth could be dangerous before it became holy. A week later, Earl lost his county truck. The official reason was budget reduction. No one in town believed it, but no one said otherwise. Farmers still came to him quietly, bringing jars of soil, hand-drawn maps, and questions they did not want the office to hear. Earl helped them from the kitchen table. He never charged. He only asked them to leave grass where the wind already knew how to turn. That fall, he and Mabel planted the first rye line along what would one day become the Crowley farm. Earl did not plant it straight. He curved it through the low draw, widened it near the bend, and left strange gaps that made no sense to Mabel. "Why not make it even?" she asked. "Because wind doesn't travel even," Earl said. He placed stakes at certain points, each one marked with a letter and number. Bay, tubulus. Bay, Dapan Blas. B. 120 Sut. Break lines, he called them. Living breaks. Things that slowed what men were too proud to stop. Years later, when Mabel married Thomas Crowley and moved on to that same farm, the rye line was already old enough to look permanent. Thomas hated it at first. He was a tidy man, and the strip made the east fence look neglected. Twice, he asked if they could cut it down and plant corn to the road. The third time, Mabel handed him her father's soil book. Thomas read for nearly an hour. He did not say much afterward. He only closed the book, walked outside, and stood by the rye until dark. The next spring, he helped Mabel seed the thin spots. Daniel never understood that part. To him, the rye was where teasing began. Boys at school called it his mother's weed wall. Men at the elevator joked that Crowley land always looked half abandoned. When Daniel was old enough to work, he wanted clean rows, straight lines, and equipment that did not look borrowed from a poorer decade. He wanted people to see the farm and think progress, not grief. Mabel could not blame him. Children inherit their parents' promises without being asked, and sometimes they spend half their lives trying to set them down. After Thomas died, the rye became easier for people to misunderstand. A widow keeping her husband's shirt on a chair was sad. A widow keeping a crooked strip of grain beside a highway was strange. When Mabel walked the line each spring with red thread in her father's book, neighbors softened their voices and said grief had made her stubborn. Maybe it had. Grief had made her remember things other people were paid to forget. Still, Mabel had not known everything. She had believed her father's last request was simple: keep the rye alive, keep the brake line standing. But on the day before he died, Earl had pressed the soil book into her hands with a fear she had never been able to forget. "Promise me," he whispered. "I promise," she said. He gripped her wrist. "Not just the rye, Mabel. When the county forgets, you remember why." For nearly 60 years, she thought remembering meant planting. Now, with Dale Rusk's burn order folded inside the same book, Mabel began to wonder whether her father had meant something much heavier. Maybe the rye was not the promise. Maybe it was only the marker. And maybe the truth beneath that promise had been waiting all these years for the wind to change. By noon, the county trucks were gone, but their tire marks remained in the dust beside the fence. Mabel did not go back inside. She walked the rye line slowly, the way another woman might walk the aisle of a church after a funeral. Her boots pressed into the dry edge of the field. Grasshoppers kicked out ahead of her. The rye whispered against itself in the wind, rough and low, not pretty enough to be called music. That was the problem with it. It did not look important. It did not stand straight like corn. It did not shine like wheat at harvest. It had no clean rows, no square corners, no neat promise of money. It leaned. It tangled. It held dust in its lower stems and old leaves at its base. Where the ground rose, the rye thinned. Where the ground fell toward the shallow draw, it thickened into a gray-green wall. To Marvin Bell, it was weeds. To Porter Hale, it was unmanaged growth. To Dale Rusk, it was a legal obstruction. To Daniel, it was one more thing that made the Crowley place look like it belonged to yesterday. But to Mabel, every crooked foot of it had a reason. She stopped near the first old stake, half buried under dried stems. The top had split from weather, but the mark remained if a person knew how to look. Bay, to Blus. Mabel brushed dirt from the letters with her thumb. Her father had not placed those stakes to mark ownership. He had placed them to mark behavior. B-17 stood where the wind from Mercy Flats first struck the Crowley fence line. B-18 sat where dust dropped low before it climbed again. B-21 marked the place where the draw pulled loose soil away from the road if the rye was thick enough to slow it first. That was what people missed. The rye was not a wall. A wall fought wind and lost. The rye listened to it. It bent where it had to bend. It slowed what it could slow. It caught dust at the bottom and let the cleaner air pass higher. It left small breaks where Earl Whitcomb had wanted the wind to bleed off pressure instead of jumping the road in one hard sheet. Mabel had spent most of her life tending those breaks without ever calling them by name. She cut some places shorter, let others seed, pulled thistle by hand, left ragged stems standing after men told her a clean cut would look better. She knew which section had to be heavy before August. She knew which gap had to stay open or the dust would roll instead of drop. That knowledge had no official label. It had only lived in her father's book, in her hands, and in the stubborn strip everyone wanted gone. Daniel found her near the second stake. He had not left after the county men drove away. His truck sat by the gate, engine ticking in the heat. For a while he watched his mother from a distance. Then he climbed the fence and came through the rye with irritation in every step. "You're going to get hurt out here," he said. "I'm walking. You know what I mean." Mabel did not answer. Daniel looked down at the stake. "What's B-17? A point. A point for what?" "For where the wind changes its mind." He stared at her. "Mom." She almost smiled, but his face was too tired for that. Daniel crouched and pulled dead grass away from the base of the stake. His fingers hit stone. He dug harder, clearing dust from a flat rock sunk into the soil near the fence. One edge showed under the rye, squared by human hands, too regular to be fieldstone. His expression changed. "What is this?" Mabel looked away toward the road. Daniel stood slowly. "Is that why you're doing this?" "Doing what?" "Fighting the county, keeping this strip, refusing to sign." He pointed at the half-buried stone. "Is this a boundary marker?" Mabel said nothing. The silence hurt more than an answer would have. Daniel wiped dirt from his palms. "So there is land involved?" "No." "Then, why won't you tell me?" Because she did not know how to say that the stone had never been about owning more land. It had been about measuring what the land would do when wind hit it wrong. Because she did not know how to explain that some markers were not meant to divide property, but to warn the living. Daniel took her silence as proof. "I knew it," he said quietly. "All these years, I thought this was about Grandpa Earl and his old soil book. But it's a deed thing, isn't it? Some old line, some old claim. That's why you won't let it go." Mabel turned to him then. "If it were only land, I would have sold it." He looked at her, confused and angry at the same time. "Then what is it?" The wind moved through the rye before she answered. The red thread in her hand lifted toward the draw again. "It's where the county stopped remembering." Daniel shook his head, not understanding, not yet ready to. A truck slowed on the road. Deputy Eli Vance leaned out of the window, not in uniform now, only in a pale work shirt with his badge clipped at his belt. He looked embarrassed to be there. His eyes moved from Mabel to Daniel, then to the exposed stone and the old stake beside it. "You shouldn't leave that uncovered too long," he said. Daniel frowned. "Why?" Eli hesitated. Mabel watched him carefully. The deputy pointed at the mark on the stake. "I've seen letters like that before." Mabel's fingers tightened around the soil book. "Where?" she asked. "In the county basement," Eli said. "On some old road maps. I was looking for drainage files last winter after the culvert washout. There were overlays down there with break marks. Some were stamped restricted." Daniel looked from Eli to his mother. "Restricted? Why?" Eli glanced toward the empty road, as if Dale Rusk might appear just because his name had gone unspoken. "I don't know," he said, "but one of them had this same kind of marking. B something, maybe B-17, maybe not." Mabel opened the soil book with hands that were not as steady as she wanted them to be. Between two old pages, Earl Whitcomb's pencil marks showed a crooked line, a low draw, and a road that no longer existed under that name. At the bottom, almost faded through, were three words Daniel had never seen before. "Whitcomb break line." Eli swallowed. Daniel stared at the page. For the first time in his life, he looked at the rye strip as if it might be something other than shame. Mabel closed the book before the wind could lift the page. The county had called the rye an obstruction, but an obstruction stood in the way of progress. A break line stood in the way of disaster. And somewhere, under Bracken County's clean modern maps, there was an old one that still knew the difference. That was where Mabel would have to go next. The county office smelled like floor wax, old paper, and air that had forgotten how to move. Mabel had not been inside that building for nearly 9 years. The last time was to pay a late property tax after Thomas died, when a clerk half her age told her there would be a fee for paying in person. Now she stood under the fluorescent lights with her father's soil book against her chest, a jelly jar of dust in one hand, and red thread looped around 2 fingers. Daniel stood beside her, but not with her. He kept his cap in both hands and looked toward the hearing room door, as if he were already measuring the damage. Men from the road office walked past them without greeting. A woman at the counter glanced at the jar in Mabel's hand, then quickly looked away. At 10 o'clock, Commissioner Dale Rusk opened the hearing. He called it a hearing, but Mabel knew the difference between listening and letting people speak before ignoring them. Dale sat at the center table with 2 other county board members. Porter Hale sat to his right with a tablet and a clean stack of printed charts. Marla Keene, the grain-hauling representative, sat in the front row wearing a cream jacket and a watch that flashed whenever she moved her wrist. There were only 12 chairs for the public. Somehow, 20 people had come. Small towns always found room for embarrassment. Dale adjusted the microphone. This special review concerns a vegetation obstruction along the Crowley property line affecting the Highway 19 shoulder expansion. Mrs. Crowley has requested reconsideration of the burn order. He said reconsideration as if the word itself was tired. Mabel stood. She placed the jelly jar on the table first. A few people leaned forward. Inside the jar was not ordinary dust. It was layered. Coarse grit at the bottom, fine red powder above it, pale field dust clinging to the glass near the lid. Mabel had collected it from 3 fence points that morning, just as her father had taught her. Porter Hale glanced at it and looked back to his tablet. "Mabel," Dale said, using her first name now that there was an audience. "We all respect family traditions, but we need to stay with verifiable evidence." "This is evidence," Mabel said. Someone coughed in the back row. It sounded too much like a laugh. She opened the soil book to the page, marked with a flour sack ribbon. Earl Whitcomb's pencil line crossed the paper in a crooked bend. Beside it were notes about draw pressure, road exposure, and the break points B17 through B21. "This line was planted because the wind comes low through Mercy Flats before it turns," she said. "If you burn the rye before the dry front passes, dust won't cross the highway in pieces. It'll come in one sheet." Porter stood with professional patience. "Mrs. Crowley, our current model uses updated weather data, road grade data, and soil exposure estimates. It does not show a meaningful hazard increase from removing that strip." "Does your model include this draw?" "Yes." "Does it include the old wagon cut under the highway fill?" Porter paused. Mabel turned a page. "Does it include the break line your office removed from the modern map?" That changed the room a little. Not enough to help her. Dale leaned forward. "There is no legally recognized break line on the current county map." "That isn't what I asked." A whisper ran through the chairs. Daniel touched her elbow. "Mom." But Mabel had already pulled a length of red thread from her pocket. She tied it between 2 pencils and held it over the jar. The thread twisted, then leaned toward the side where the finest dust had collected. "This is what the wind did this morning at B17, she said. "It pulled low, same as the book says, same as the rye shows." Marvin Bell, sitting in the back, muttered, "Well, I guess the thread has spoken." This time, the laughter filled the room, not loud enough to be called cruel, just loud enough to make an old woman stand alone. Daniel's face flushed. He stared at the floor. Dale let the laughter fade before he spoke. That was worse than stopping it. "Mrs. Crowley, Bracken County cannot delay a public improvement project because of string, dust jars, and handwritten notes from 1941. Marla Keene rose before Mabel could answer. Her voice was smooth, but every word had money behind it. "With respect to the Crowley family," she said, "the hauling schedule tied to this project affects dozens of growers. Delays near harvest will cost real people, real income. My company has already assigned contracts based on completion of that shoulder." Daniel looked up sharply. Mabel saw it. So did Dale. Marla turned slightly toward him. "Some of those contracts are with local independent haulers. We would hate to see uncertainty affect those relationships." There it was. Not a threat on paper. A threat spoken politely in a public room. Daniel's hands tightened around his cap. "Mrs. Keene, I'm not trying to delay anything." "No one said you were," she replied. But everyone heard what she meant. Mabel felt the room shift away from the rye and toward her son. That was how pressure worked. If it could not make you afraid for yourself, it found someone you loved. Dale tapped the release form with one finger. "Mrs. Crowley, the county is willing to waive assessment fees if you sign today. This is the practical solution." Mabel looked at Daniel. For one moment, he looked back like a boy again, trapped between wanting to trust her and needing the world to stop punishing him for being her son. She almost reached for the pen. Then Deputy Eli Vance stepped in from the side wall. He had been standing there so quietly that Mabel had forgotten he was in the room. "Commissioner," Eli said, "could the restricted road overlays be reviewed before the deadline?" Dale turned his head slowly. The room went still. "What overlays?" Porter asked. Eli swallowed. "Basement archive. Old road bond files. Some have break markings near Highway 19. Dale's smile disappeared. "Deputy Vance, this is not a records hearing." "No, sir," Eli said. "But if there's an old map—" "There is no relevant old map," Dale cut in. Mabel heard the difference. He had not said there was no old map, only that it was not relevant. Dale closed the folder in front of him. "The burn order stands. Friday at 6. The gavel struck once. People rose too quickly, grateful to escape the discomfort. Marvin Bell walked past without meeting Mabel's eyes. Porter Hale gathered his charts, but his face was less certain than before. Daniel left the room first. Outside, heat pressed against the pavement. No one spoke on the steps. Mabel rode home with Daniel in silence. Halfway down the road, he finally said, "You heard Marla. If this keeps going, I lose the contract." Mabel looked out at the fields, bare and shining under the sun. "I heard her. And you're still not signing?" She did not answer. When they reached the farm, orange flags were already waiting. County workers had come while they were gone. The flags ran along the rye strip in a bright, ugly line, each one marking where the burn crew would start. Daniel stopped the truck by the gate. Mabel got out slowly. The rye moved behind the flags as the wind shifted again, lower now, rougher. At the first stake, someone had hammered an orange flag through the soil beside B-17. Mabel bent down and pulled it free. Daniel shut his truck door hard behind her. "Mom," he said, exhausted, "you can't pull them all." Mabel looked down the line of flag. "No," she said, "but I know where they started." And that was enough to tell her where the county was afraid to look next. The first dust came small, not like a storm. Not like the red wall Mabel had seen once in childhood, rolling across Mercy Flats so wide it made grown men stop speaking. This was only a thin lift of dirt from the Harlan field south of the highway, where a hired crew had disked the ground clean that morning to prepare for late beans. But Mabel saw it before anyone else did. She was standing near B-17, with one Orange County flag in her hand and the red thread tied again to the fence wire. The air had changed after lunch. It had lost the flat heat of morning and taken on a nervous pull, the kind that made dry leaves turn their pale undersides up before they moved. The thread lifted, then it twisted, then it pulled low toward the draw. Mabel did not call for Daniel. She had learned long ago that some truths grew weaker when shouted. Instead, she walked to the gate, opened it, and stood where he would have to see her when he came out of the machine shed. Daniel was under the hood of his pickup, sleeves rolled, one hand black with grease. He had been avoiding the rye since they returned from the county office. Avoiding her too. "Wind's turning," Mabel said. He did not look up. "Weather radio says gusts after midnight. The radio doesn't stand in this draw." Daniel wiped his hand on a rag and looked toward the road. "Mom, I can't do this all day." "Then don't. Just watch." He almost refused. Then the dust crossed the far end of the Harlan field. At first, it looked harmless, no more than a brown breath dragging over the ground. It moved along the disked soil, gathering itself. When it reached the shallow dip near the road, it should have run straight toward Highway 19. That was what open dirt did when wind pushed low and fast. Instead, the dust struck the thick section of rye near B-17 and broke. Part of it lifted and thinned. Part of it slid down into the draw, where the old stems caught it close to the ground. The rest moved along the fence in a ragged line, losing strength before it reached the shoulder. Daniel straightened. Mabel kept her eyes on the strip. The dust did not disappear. It did not prove her right in some grand, clean way that would satisfy a county board. It simply slowed where the rye was thick and thickened, where the county had already trimmed too hard near the culvert. That difference was everything. A pickup came over the rise too fast. It belonged to Tanner Wells, 17 years old, who drove like every road in Bracken County had been built for his confidence. The little sheet of dust crossed the pavement just as he reached the bend. For 1 second, his truck vanished in a pale blur. Daniel stepped forward. "Easy, kid." Tanner's brake lights flashed. The pickup wobbled toward the shoulder, tires spitting gravel. Then, just past the Crowley fence, where the rye still stood tall, the dust thinned enough for him to see the line again. He corrected hard and stopped half sideways near the ditch. No crash, no siren, no headline. Just a boy sitting behind a windshield with both hands locked on the wheel, suddenly looking younger than 17. Daniel was already moving. He ran to the road, Mabel behind him as fast as her knees allowed. Tanner rolled down the window, face pale under his cap. "I couldn't see," he said. "It just came up." Daniel looked back at the rye strip, then at the open patch where the county workers had cut brush near the culvert. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Deputy Eli Vance arrived 5 minutes later, called by Tanner's shaking mother, who had seen the truck from her porch. Eli took the boy's statement, measured the tire marks, and walked the shoulder with his notebook in hand. Mabel watched him pause near B-17. He crouched where dust had collected in a long crescent at the base of the rye. Then he crossed to the trimmed section near the orange flags, where finer dust had blown straight over the gravel and onto the pavement. "You see it?" Mabel asked. Eli did not answer right away. A deputy learned to be careful with words. A young deputy under Dale Rusk learned to be careful with silence, too. "I see a difference," he said at last. Daniel heard him. That mattered more than Mabel wanted to admit. By 4 o'clock, Dale Rusk had heard as well. He arrived alone this time, no Smile, no Porter Hale, no board members. He stepped out of his truck and looked at the tire marks on the shoulder. "Tanner Wells drives too fast," he said. "He does," Mabel replied. Dale glanced at her. "Then we agree. We agree he drove too fast. We don't agree about why he could see again before the bend." Dale's eyes moved to the rye. "A little field dust is not a hazard study." "No," Mabel said, "but it's what happens before one." Eli shifted near his cruiser. Dale noticed. "Deputy, file this as reckless operation in low visibility." Eli held his notebook closed. "There wasn't low visibility past the rye, sir." Dale's jaw tightened. For a moment, the only sound was the dry tick of grasshoppers in the ditch. "File it correctly," Dale said. Then he left. That night, Mabel sat at the kitchen table with the soil book open beneath the yellow light. Daniel stood at the sink, washing grease from his hands, though the water had already run clear. Neither of them had spoken much since Tanner's near wreck. Mabel turned pages carefully, searching for B-17. She found the old map first, then the wind notes. Then a page she had skipped 100 times because the top half was missing. It had been torn cleanly, not by age but by a hand that meant to remove something. At the bottom, Earl Whitcomb's pencil remained faint but readable. "After the Mercer Flats wreck, never remove the brake line before dry front passage." Mabel read it once. Then again. Daniel came to stand behind her. "What wreck?" he asked. Mabel touched the torn edge. "I don't know enough," she said. It was the first honest answer she had given him in days. Before Daniel could respond, headlights swept across the kitchen wall. A knock came at the back door, quick and uneasy. Eli stood on the porch with his hat in his hand. "I checked the basement index," he said. "Not the files, just the index." Mabel opened the door wider. Eli lowered his voice. "There's supposed to be a 1941 highway overlay for the Mercy Flats section. Whitcomb notation. Brake line B series." Daniel looked at the soil book. Mabel looked at Eli. "Supposed to be?" she asked. Eli nodded. "The folder is there," he said. "But the overlay is missing." Outside, beyond the porch light, the rye moved in the dark like something awake. Mabel closed the soil book. If the map was missing, then someone had taken it. And if someone had taken it, then the county had not forgotten the brake line by accident. The first sign had come from the dust. The next one would have to come from the records. Eli Vance did not take them into the county basement that night. He was too careful for that, and maybe too honest. Instead, he told Mabel to meet him the next morning when the public records desk opened, because a person could ask for an index without breaking a rule. Looking at a folder title was not theft. Requesting an old map was not rebellion. At least, that was what Eli said. But when Mabel walked into the county office with Daniel beside her, the building felt different from the day before. The same floor wax smell, the same fluorescent lights, the same framed photographs of commissioners shaking hands beside roads, bridges, schools, and ribbon cuttings. Only now Mabel noticed what those photographs did not show. No dust, no ditches, no brake lines, no one standing where progress had done damage. Eli met them at the records counter with a folder request slip already filled out in careful handwriting. Road bond files Mercy Flats. Section 1941. Whitcomb soil overlay. B-series brake markings. The clerk read the slip, frowned, and disappeared into the back. Daniel stood with his arms folded, trying to look like he did not care, but Mabel saw him watching the door. He had not slept. Neither had she. When the clerk returned, she carried a gray archival box with one corner crushed in. Dust had collected along the lid seam. She set it on the counter and said, "Viewing only. Nothing leaves the room." Eli nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Mabel opened the box. Inside were road sketches, survey notes, drainage estimates, and old bond paperwork tied with faded cotton tape. She recognized her father's handwriting before she touched the page. Earl Whitcomb had written small, tight, and slanted, as if every word had to lean into wind. Daniel saw it too. "That's Grandpa Earl?" Mabel nodded. Near the bottom of the box sat an empty folder. The label was still there. Whitcomb's Soil Overlay Mercy Flats Road Exposure 1941. But the overlay itself was gone. Daniel looked at Eli. "You said it was missing." "I said the folder was there," Eli replied. "I didn't say the missing part would make sense." Mabel lifted the folder carefully. A sheet of brittle carbon paper had stuck to the inside flap. Most of the transfer had faded, but not all. A ghost line curved across it, broken in places, following the same shape as the rye strip along the Crowley fence. Beside the line, faint but readable, was one mark. "Bay, Tuzabalas." Mabel could not speak. For almost 60 years, she had carried her father's book like a private burden. She had let people call it superstition, grief, habit, stubbornness. She had believed the proof lived only in memory and pencil. But here it was. Not complete. Not enough yet. Still official. Daniel leaned closer, and for once he did not rush her. His finger hovered above the ghost line without touching it. "That's our fence," he said. "No," Mabel whispered. "That's before our fence." Eli turned one of the road sketches and set it beside the carbon paper. The old wagon road ran lower than the modern highway. The low draw appeared wider, marked by hatch lines. Then, in Earl's writing, there were notes Daniel read slowly under his breath. "Low wind channel. Dust sheet risk after plowing. Living barrier required before dry front passage. Do not clear brake line during exposed soil season. Daniel vent pale." Porter Hale came in 20 minutes later. Eli had called him, which was either brave or foolish. Porter arrived with a laptop bag over one shoulder, his tie crooked, his face wearing the look of a man who had spent the night arguing with himself. "I have 15 minutes, he said. "And I'm not saying this changes anything." Mabel stepped back from the counter. Porter photographed the carbon transfer, the old sketch, and the index label. Then he pulled up the modern erosion model used in the hearing. Blue lines appeared on his screen, neat and confident. Roads, grades, field exposure, prevailing wind. Mabel watched his face as he compared them. At first, he looked skeptical, then annoyed, then quiet. "What?" Daniel asked. Porter did not answer immediately. He zoomed in near the Crowley property. The modern model showed the highway shoulder and the grade change, but the low draw was simplified into a shallow drainage feature. The old wagon cut beneath the highway fill was missing entirely. So was the brake line. Porter swallowed. The modern map flattened it. "Flattened what?" Eli asked. "The draw behavior," Porter said. "The old cut changes the way low wind moves through that section. If the field south of the highway is exposed, and if the dry front comes in before the burn residue settles." He stopped. Mabel finished for him. "Dust comes in one sheet." Porter looked at her then. Not kindly, not warmly, but differently. "It could," he said. Daniel closed his eyes. Those two words changed the room. Not because Porter had declared Mabel right. He had not. Men like Porter did not surrender all at once. But he had opened the first official crack in the county's certainty. He had admitted the model was missing something old. Mabel touched the carbon paper. "My father planted B17, where this line crossed the draw," she said. "The rye isn't wild, it's the break." Porter took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "A living barrier," he said, almost to himself. "Rye, grass, staggered gaps. It would slow lateral dust movement." Daniel stared at the old documents. So Mom was right. Mabel did not like how simple that sounded. She had been right about the rye. But the missing overlay, the torn page, and the words Mercer Flats Wreck meant there was still something larger underneath. Proof of function was not proof of guilt, not yet. Before anyone could speak again, Dale Rusk's voice cut across the records room. "Deputy Vance." Eli turned. Dale stood in the doorway with his hat in one hand, and no smile at all. Behind him, The records clerk looked frightened. "What exactly are you doing with restricted road bond material?" Dale asked. Eli kept his voice even. "Responding to a public index request from a private citizen involved in an active county order. The index is public." Dale walked to the counter and looked down at the open box. His eyes paused on the empty overlay folder for half a second too long. Mabel saw it. So did Daniel. Porter closed his laptop slowly. Dale picked up the empty folder and looked at the label. "This material has no bearing on the current burn order." Porter surprised them all by speaking. "Commissioner, the old data may affect the model." Dale turned to him. "May?" Porter hesitated. "It should be reviewed." "Then review it after compliance," Dale said. "The order remains in effect." Daniel stepped forward. "You mean even if the county map is wrong?" Dale's face tightened. "The current map is the legal map." Mabel looked at the ghost line on the carbon paper. A line almost erased, but not gone. "That doesn't make it true," she said. Dale closed the archival box. "Mrs. Crowley, by 6 o'clock Friday, that obstruction comes down. If it does not, the county will act." He looked at Eli. "And Deputy Vance, I suggest you return to your assigned duties before you create a problem you cannot fix." The room held still after he left. Porter did not reopen his laptop. Daniel did not look away from the box. For the first time in his life, he had seen his mother's strange old promise written in county paper, in his grandfather's hand, under a label someone had tried to empty. When they stepped outside, the wind was rising again. Daniel stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Mom," he said, his voice rough, "I'm sorry I called it just rye." Mabel looked toward the highway. "You didn't know?" "No," Daniel said, "but somebody did." That was the midpoint truth. The rye strip had been planted for a reason. The county had kept a record of that reason. And someone had removed the one page that might explain what happened when the brake line was ignored. Now they did not just have to save the rye. They had to find out who had wanted the map gone before Friday came. The second notice came before breakfast. Daniel found it taped to the gate, sealed inside a plastic sleeve so the morning damp would not soften the ink. He brought it into the kitchen without speaking and laid it beside Mabel's coffee cup. This one was not polite. If the Crowley property failed to comply with the vegetation removal order by Friday at 6 o'clock, Bracken County would authorize forced clearance, assess labor and equipment costs to the property, and reserve the right to place a lien for unpaid fees. Mabel read it once. Daniel read it 3 times. "A lien," he said. "Mom, they're not just threatening the rye now." "No," Mabel said. "Now they're threatening the house." He pushed away from the table, anger and fear twisting together in his face. "And you still think this is simple?" "I never thought it was simple. You don't understand what they can take." That hurt because it was almost true. Mabel understood old kinds of taking. Land shaved away by roads, names left off reports, widows spoken over in public rooms. Daniel understood new kinds. Contracts, fees, insurance, late payments, fuel bills, legal words that turned into locks on doors. Before Mabel could answer, Daniel's phone rang. He looked at the screen and went still. "Marla Kine." He stepped onto the porch, but Mabel heard enough through the screen door. "Yes, ma'am." "No, ma'am. I'm trying. I understand the schedule." When he came back inside, he looked older than he had 10 minutes earlier. "They're reviewing my hauling agreement," he said. "Because of me. Because of the delay." He swallowed. "Same thing, to them." Mabel looked down at the notice. For the first time since Dale Rusk had come to the gate, her hand moved toward the release form still folded inside the soil book. Daniel saw it. For one fragile second, hope crossed his face. Then the phone rang again. This time it was Porter Hale. His voice came through thin and hurried. He asked if Mabel still had the dust jar, the B-17 stake location, and any notes about the old wagon cut. He said he had tried to run a revised model before office hours. With the draw restored and the old cut added back in, the hazard pattern changed. "How much?" Mabel asked. Porter did not answer directly. "That's why I called," he said. "My supervisor told me to stop." Daniel leaned closer. Porter lowered his voice. "Commissioner Rusk says no unofficial review can affect an active compliance order." "Then why are you calling?" Mabel asked. "A pause. Because the model looked wrong yesterday," Porter said. "And today it looks dangerous." After he hung up, the kitchen felt smaller. By noon, Eli Vance had been pulled from field duty, and reassigned to record storage under supervision. He came by in his personal truck, parked beyond the mailbox, and did not cross the gate. "I can't access the road bond files anymore," he said. Daniel cursed under his breath. Eli glanced down the road. "But I remembered something from the basement index." There was another name tied to the Mercy Flats folder. "What name?" Mabel asked. "Mercer." The word moved through her like cold water. That afternoon, Mabel opened the soil book again, not looking for B17 this time, but for every place her father had written Mercer. The name appeared more than once. Not in the road notes, not in the wind tables. In the margins, Lena Mercer, West, Wagon, Bend. Mercer Boys School Route. Ask LM before final statement. Mabel touched the last line with one finger. Ask LM. Not file. Not report. Ask. Daniel sat across from her, silent now. Something about the handwriting had changed him. The name made the story less like a theory and more like a person. "Who was Lena Mercer?" he asked. "I don't know," Mabel said. This time, he believed her. Near sundown, a car Mabel did not recognize pulled into the yard. It was an old green sedan, clean but faded, with a folded walker in the back seat. A woman stepped out slowly. She was small, white-haired, and straight-backed in the way of people who had spent their lives refusing to collapse where others expected them to. Daniel went to meet her. The woman looked past him to Mabel. "You Earl Whitcomb's girl?" Mabel came down the porch steps. "Yes." The woman nodded once, as if confirming something she had carried too long. "My name is Ruth Mercer Ames," she said. "Lena Mercer was my mother." Mabel's hand tightened on the porch rail. Ruth looked toward the rye strip, moving dark against the evening field. "I heard the county wants that burned." "They do," Mabel said. Ruth's mouth trembled, but her voice stayed hard. "My mother used to say that line was the only reason they found anybody alive after the dust hit the road." Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. Mabel could not speak. Ruth turned back to her. "Your father didn't just plant rye, Mrs. Crowley. He tried to warn them before my brothers got on that road." The last light slid across the Orange County flags, making each one look like a small flame waiting to be lit. Mabel looked from Ruth to the soil book in her hands. The story had just left the map. Now it had names. And once a hidden thing had names, it could no longer stay buried as quietly as before. Ruth Mercer Ames would not sit in the kitchen. She said the house was too warm, though the evening had cooled. She asked to stand by the rye. Mabel understood. Some truths did not belong under a roof. The three of them walked to the east fence while the last light drained from Mercy Flats. Daniel carried a lantern. Mabel carried the soil book. Ruth walked slowly, one hand on her cane, her eyes fixed on the gray-green strip as if she were looking at people instead of grain. "My mother was Lena Mercer," Ruth said. "She cleaned classrooms at the old two-room school and took in sewing at night. My brothers, Samuel and Peter, rode the wagon road every morning with 6 other children." Mabel held the book tighter. Ruth touched the top wire of the fence. The day it happened, the field south of the road had been scraped clean. New grading, new shoulders. Men were proud of that road. Said it proved Bracken County was moving forward. She looked toward Highway 19. Then the wind came low. Daniel lowered the lantern. Ruth's voice did not break, and that made it worse. "My mother said the dust did not fall like weather. It came like a wall somebody had built and pushed across the road. The school wagon went blind before the bend. A truck behind it never saw the team slow down." Mabel closed her eyes. The fragments from childhood returned differently now. Her father's bloody sleeve. County men in the front room. The words road bond, settlement, unverified cause. "How many?" Daniel asked. 3 dead that day," Ruth said. 2 more never right again. My brother Peter lived 6 months with his lungs ruined. Samuel was 12. No one spoke. The rye moved softly beside them. "My father warned them," Mabel whispered. Ruth turned to her. "Yes, he did." From inside her coat, Ruth pulled a folded envelope, yellowed and soft at the seams. "My mother kept this behind a drawer in her sewing table. I found it after she died." Mabel took it with both hands. Inside was a carbon copy of a letter written in Earl Whitcomb's hand, dated 3 days before the Mercer Flats wreck. To the Bracken County Road Bond Committee. Subject: Emergency Delay Recommendation, Mercy Flats Road Exposure. Mabel read slowly, each line making the present feel thinner. Earl had warned that grading the shoulder before dry front passage would expose loose soil across the low wind channel. He had recommended delaying school traffic, leaving temporary grass breaks in place, and planting a living barrier along the Crowley side before the next season. At the bottom, in harder pencil, was one sentence. Failure to maintain a brake line may create sudden road blindness during low dust movement. Daniel's face changed. He told them before, he said. Ruth nodded. They held the meeting anyway. Said delaying the road would endanger the bond vote. Said people were tired of mud roads and fear. Mabel turned the page. There was another copy behind it, not in Earl's hand, a county summary, shorter, cleaner, colder, cause of incident, driver error, under adverse weather conditions. No mention of grading. No mention of removed grass line. No mention of Earl's warning. At the bottom was a signature. Commissioner Harold Rusk, Dale's grandfather. Mabel felt the old anger rise, then something heavier beneath it. Not surprise, not exactly. A grief that had waited 60 years for a name. Ruth looked at her. Your father came to my mother after the funeral. He brought money. Mabel looked up. What money? Settlement money. Small, not enough, but enough to keep us in the house that winter. Ruth folded both hands over her cane. He told Mama if he pushed too hard, the county would withdraw it and call him unstable. He said he would plant the brake line himself. He said he would keep copies until a safer time. Mabel could not breathe right. For most of her life, Earl Whitcomb had lived inside her memory as the man who knew the truth when others lied. Now another truth stood beside that one. He had known, he had warned, he had tried, and then he had compromised. Not for himself, maybe. Not out of cowardice alone. But the result was the same. The Mercer families got money without truth. The county got progress without blame. And the rye got planted over a silence. Daniel seemed to understand the wound before she did. Mom, he said softly. Mabel shook her head once. Ruth's expression softened. I don't tell you this to shame him. My mother never hated Earl. She said he was the only county man who came back after the dust settled. But he didn't bring the report public. No, Ruth said. He didn't. The words settled between them. Mabel opened the soil book to the torn page. Ruth's envelope held what the missing half had once hidden. The warning letter, the false summary, the Rusk signature, and the reason brake line B17 had been planted where it stood. This was not about weeds. It was not even only about safety. It was about a county that had learned how to turn dead children into paperwork, and then call the paperwork clean. Headlights appeared on the road. Porter Hale's county vehicle slowed near the gate. He stepped out with his tablet already in his hand, face pale under the lantern light. I ran it again, he said. Unofficially. No one answered. Porter looked toward the south field. Dry fronts ahead of schedule. Winds before dawn, maybe sooner. If they burn that strip tomorrow, Highway 19 shouldn't be open. Daniel looked at Mabel. Mabel looked at Ruth. Then, far beyond the rye, from the bare fields of Mercy Flats, a thin red haze began to rise against the dark. The past had finally given them the truth. The present was giving them no time to hide from it. The burn crew arrived before noon. 2 county trucks came first, then a flatbed with water tanks, drip torches, shovels, and men who looked as if they had been told not to ask questions. Orange flags still marked the rye line. The sky above Mercy Flats had turned a dull copper, not dark enough to frighten people yet, but wrong enough to make dogs stay close to porches. Mabel stood at B17 with the soil book under one arm, and Ruth Mercer Ames beside her. Daniel parked his hauling truck across the farm entrance. Dale Rusk stepped out of his county vehicle and stared at it. Move that truck, Daniel. Daniel did not move. Behind Dale, Porter Hale climbed from his own vehicle with his tablet in hand and his tie loose at the collar. Eli Vance arrived last. Not in a cruiser, but in his personal truck, because the county had taken him off-road duty that morning. Dale pointed at the rye. The order stands. Porter stepped forward. Commissioner, the dry front is accelerating. I have updated wind data and a revised local model. Burning this strip today creates a visibility hazard. Dale did not look at him. Your review was not authorized. No, Porter said. But the wind is. A few workers shifted uneasily. Mabel opened the soil book. Ruth held Earl's carbon letter and the false county summary in both hands. The papers trembled, not from fear now, but from the wind moving lower across the field. Dale's eyes fixed on the old signature. Harold Rusk. For a moment, the commissioner looked less like a man in power and more like a grandson who had found a locked door open inside his own house. "This is not the place," he said. Ruth's voice was thin but steady. "It was never the place, Commissioner. That's how it stayed buried." The first brown sheet of dust crossed the Harlan field at 12:37. No one spoke when it rose. It was larger than the little drift from the day before. Wider. Lower. It came dragging itself over exposed soil, gathering loose dirt as it moved toward the highway shoulder. The burn crew foreman lowered his torch. "Hold up," he muttered. Dale turned toward the road. A school bus appeared over the southern rise. Daniel saw it first, then the grain truck behind it. Then two cars following too close because drivers in clear air always believed clear air would last. "Highway's open," Daniel said. Porter looked at his tablet. "It shouldn't be." The dust sheet hit the trimmed patch near the culvert and crossed the gravel in one hard blur. The first car slowed. The grain truck braked. The bus driver tapped the brakes too, careful but already entering the low stretch. Then the dust reached the thick rye at B17. It broke. Not completely. Not like a miracle. The world did not become clean and safe because an old woman had been right, but the rye slowed the bottom of the dust, caught the heaviest part, and split the sheet into ragged streams. Visibility held just long enough for the bus to stay in its lane. Daniel ran to his truck. Marla Keene's company name was still listed on his hauling contract. Her schedule still controlled his season. But he did not look at his phone when it began ringing. He drove straight to the highway entrance, swung the truck sideways, and blocked the shoulder access with his hazard lights flashing. A grain driver leaned on his horn. Daniel climbed out and shouted, "Stop the road!" Eli was already moving. He pulled an old handheld radio from his truck, one he had kept from volunteer stormwatch duty. "County Dispatch. This is Vance," he said. "Visibility hazard on Highway 19 at Mercy Flats. Shut down southbound traffic now." A voice crackled back. "Deputy Vance, you're not assigned." "Then assign me later," Eli snapped. "There's a school bus in the dust." That ended the argument. Porter ran toward the burn crew. "Water on the flags, no flame, keep the rye wet, not burned." The crew obeyed him before they looked to Dale. That was when Mabel saw the county begin to change. Not all at once. Not nobly. Not with speeches. It changed because the men holding tools looked at the road, then at the rye, then at the old woman they had come to overrule, and decided they did not want to be the hand that lit the match. Dale stood alone beside the gate. Dust struck his polished boots. Ruth walked to him and held out the false summary. "My brothers' names were Samuel and Peter Mercer," she said. "Your grandfather signed the paper that took the road's blame off the county and put it on a driver who could not defend himself." Dale did not take the paper. Not at first. Then the school bus cleared the low stretch and stopped beyond Daniel's truck. Children's faces turned toward the rye through dusty windows. Dale took the page. His hand shook once before he steadied it. "I can't undo what he signed," he said. "No," Ruth answered, "but you can stop signing around it." The words did what anger had not. Dale walked back to his vehicle, opened the door, and pulled a county emergency form from the console. He wrote slowly, each stroke fighting something old. "Emergency hold on vegetation removal. Highway 19 temporary closure, pending safety review. Archive preservation order for Mercy Flats road bond records." He signed his name at the bottom. Dale Rusk. Then he handed the form to Eli. "File it," he said. Eli looked at him. "Correctly?" Dale closed his eyes for half a second. "Correctly." No one applauded. That would have made it too easy. Daniel came back from the road covered in dust, his phone still ringing in his pocket. He stopped in front of Mabel, breathing hard. "I may have lost the contract," he said. Mabel looked at the bus, the stopped cars, the rye still bending but unburned. "I know," Daniel swallowed. "I should have believed you sooner." Mabel touched his cheek with dusty fingers. "You believed in time." Across the fence, Porter Hale stood in the rye with the burn crew, marking where the dust had split. Eli radioed the closure. Ruth Mercer Ames held her mother's envelope against her chest as if, after 60 years, it had finally become heavy enough to be real. And Dale Rusk stood alone in the road, reading his grandfather's signature again. The storm had not ended, neither had the investigation. But by sunset, Bracken County knew one thing it could never unknow. The rye had not been blocking progress. It had been standing between progress and the truth, and after the dust settled, someone would have to decide what that truth should become. By October, the rye had gone gold, not the clean gold of wheat fields and advertisements, but a rougher color, weathered and uneven, with dust still caught low in the stems. The county had not burned it. No one had dared touch it after the emergency hold, though for weeks the orange flags remained along the fence like little pieces of shame nobody wanted to remove first. Highway 19 reopened after 3 days, then narrowed again under temporary warning signs. Low visibility area. Reduced speed. Soil review in progress. It was not justice, not yet. Justice moved slower than dust. Bracken County appointed a records review committee, which sounded official enough to make people suspicious. The State Transportation Office requested the old road bond files. Lawyers wrote letters. Reporters from 2 towns over came once, took pictures of the rye, and tried to make Mabel stand beside it with her arms crossed like a hero. She refused. "This isn't about me," she told them. They printed her picture anyway, from a distance. Dale Rusk did not resign that fall. He did not stand on the courthouse steps and give the kind of apology people clap for. His punishment came quieter. The county board removed him from the highway expansion review. The archive preservation order he had signed forced every Mercy Flats record into public inventory, including the false summary with Harold Rusk's name at the bottom. At the first public records meeting, Dale sat in the back row. Ruth Mercer Ames sat in the front. When the clerk read Samuel and Peter Mercer's names into the county record, Ruth did not cry. She simply closed her eyes and held her mother's envelope with both hands. After 60 years, the county finally said the names out loud without calling the wreck driver error. That was not enough, but it was no longer nothing. Daniel lost the hauling contract with Marla Keene's company before harvest ended. The letter arrived in language so polished it almost sounded kind. Schedule uncertainty. Operational risk. Contract realignment. For 2 days, Daniel kept it folded in his shirt pocket and said nothing. On the 3rd morning, Mabel found him by the rye with a shovel, resetting one of the old stakes the burn crew had loosened. "I thought you'd be angry," she said. "I am," Daniel answered. "At me?" He drove the stake deeper, then leaned on the shovel. "At everybody. At them. At myself. At Grandpa Earl a little. At you some days." Mabel nodded. Daniel looked toward the highway, where new survey ribbons marked restoration points instead of burn lines. "Porter says the state needs haulers for soil barrier work. Smaller money, dirtier roads, less certainty." "Sounds honest," Mabel said. For the first time in weeks, Daniel smiled. "Sounds like Crowley work." The Crowley farm did not become rich. No trust fund appeared. No developer offered millions. The roof over the machine shed still needed tin. Mabel still counted medicine bottles at the end of each month. But the county lien never came, and Daniel started hauling rye seed, straw bales, and erosion matting to farms that had once laughed at his mother's weed wall. Some men apologized. Most did not. They slowed down when they passed the fence, which was its own kind of confession. In November, Ruth Mercer Ames came with her granddaughter and a lawyer from the state land office. They sat at Mabel's kitchen table with Daniel, Porter Hale, and Eli Vance, who had been reassigned to records work after the archive review made punishing him inconvenient. The papers they signed did not give the rye to the county. Mabel would not allow that. They did not give it only to the Crowleys either. The strip, the low draw, the old B-series stakes, and the first 30 feet beyond the fence became the Crowley-Mercer Soil Trust. A living easement, Porter called it. A promise written into land instead of memory. Ruth signed first. Mabel signed second. Daniel signed as witness. Then Mabel opened the soil book and placed Earl's original warning letter beside Lena Mercer's envelope. "Not in a museum?" Porter asked gently. Mabel shook her head. "Museums are for things that are finished." She looked out the window at the rye moving in the cold wind. "This still has work to do." The first school group came in March. 12 children stood along the fence in coats too bright for the brown field. Their teacher tried to keep them quiet, but wind never encouraged silence. Mabel gave each child a short piece of red thread and showed them how to tie it to the wire without knotting it too tight. "If it can't move," she said, "it can't tell you anything." A girl with missing front teeth watched her thread lift sideways toward the draw. "It's not going the way the weather app said," the girl whispered. Mabel smiled. "No," she said, It's going the way the land said. Daniel stood behind the group with his hands in his jacket pockets. Ruth sat in the truck where it was warm, watching through the windshield. Porter took notes. Eli marked the old B-17 stake on a new public map, not as an obstruction, but as protection. Mabel did not give a speech. She only walked the line with the children, showing them where dust dropped, where grass held, where a road could go blind if people believed a clean map more than a dirty field. At the last stake, the little girl handed Mabel back the red thread. Mabel closed the child's fingers around it. "You keep it," she said. The girl looked surprised. "What for?" Mabel glanced at the rye, then at Highway 19, where cars now slowed before the bend. "For when somebody tells you old things don't know anything." The wind rose then, soft but certain. The rye bent, the thread pulled sideways, and this time, someone young was watching.